Добър вечер, дами и господа. Много съм щастлива, че сте тази вечер с нас. Всъщност има ли в залата хора, които не разбират български? Да, тогава ще си продължа на български, въпреки че съм си написала и на английски език това, което искам да кажа. Литературни срещи през ноември. Много съм щастлива да открия нашето второ издание през тази година. Както казахме през юни месец, литературните срещи са серия от събития, които се случват през цялата година и всеки път, във всеки месец, събитията са различни в различни формати. Аз наистина съм много развълнувана да бъда тук, където започнахме през юни месец със срещата на Олга Токарчук и Георги Господинов. Щастлива съм, че и Георги Господинов отново е с нас тук. Както и втория ден, в който цялото пространство на Топлоцентрала се превърна в сцена на нашия 7-часов литературен колаж от събития. Наистина литературни срещи иска да прави това, да свързва различните изкуства, както и изкуствата с науката, да представя автори, да задава въпроси, да поставя контексти. И е съвсем така логично за нас в края на годината да искаме да направим един преглед на Литературната 2022, да видим какви са тенденциите, кои са най-важните жанрове, награди и събития през годината. Искам, разбира се, да благодаря на институциите, които застанаха зад нас. Национален културен фонд, Министерство на културата и Столична община. Събитието е част от календара на културните събития на София и имаме подкрепа и на Столична програма Култура. Основен партньор в литературните срещи ноември е Фондация Следваща страница. Ние заедно правим тази вечер, тази дискусия, а след това ще продължим с литературен квиз в сцена бар на втория етаж на Топлоцентрала. Той е направен от нашите партньори Тривиал с награди от Рацио, Колибри и Прочети София фондация. Сега искам да ви представя модератора тази вечер, Яна Генова. Тя е директор на Фондация Следваща страница и инициатор на къщата за литература и превод. Яна е един от най-важните, разпознаваеми, значими за мен професионалисти в полето на литературата в България. Има повече от 20 години опит в културния мениджмънт. Работи така да засилва литературната комуникация на международно ниво и също с специален фокус върху така наречените малки езици. Яна влага еднаква страсти в това да намира финансиране за културните си проекти и в това да прекопава градината на къщата за литература и превод. Така че посрещнете Яна Генова.
Мерси. Да, ако някой иска да се включи в копаенето на градината, приемаме доброволци по всяко време. Малко е нелепо да говорим на английски тази вечер и за мен също е нелепо, бидейки в Топлоцентрала, но все пак courtesy of our international guests, I'm obliged to switch into English and to also note that English is, as a friend of mine says, it's not even my second language. So none of us, except of one of the panelists, is a native speaker. So you're gonna be hearing various versions of English in various pronunciations. But I bet we will understand each other. It's really cool that literature and the conversation about literature is taking place on such a big stage, although it's a bit unusual for us in literature to be on, under the lights and on such a big stage. But that's typical of reading Sophia Foundation and Dora, who always wants to really look into merging the various arts and bringing literature into the spotlight, whereas it's usually pushed in the margins, and it's not that fancy and not that spectacular. It's my pleasure to introduce the videos you have seen, in a way introduce some of our guests tonight, but still I will introduce them one by one, in alphabetical order, in Latin alphabet. So Biляна Kурtашева, please. Biляna is the only real literary critic among us tonight. She's please take your seat. She's an academic. She teaches theory of literature, creative writing, essay writing in the New Bulgarian University. She's also editor-in-chief of the cultural journal of the New Bulgarian Literature, Следва. I don't know how to translate that into English. I do recommend to all of you her last book, which I also don't know how to translate, По ръба на сравнението, which is from the perspective of intertextuality, looks into Yavorov and Rolling Stones. Not really. But
not only.
No, not really.
Yeah, and I will speak the Bulgarian version of English this evening.
Yeah, we both will have the Bulgarian version of English. And as I said, the only real literary critic among us. Hannah Komar, please, Hannah, join us. Hannah Komar is a poet from Belarus. She is currently on a creative residency at the Literature and Translation House. For the last 1 year, she has been living in London, doing a PhD on creative writing in the University of Brighton.
I am just started. I finished master's and to do.
So she
PhD.
did the master's. She's a published poet, winner of the last year's Norwegian Award for Contribution to Freedom of Thought. I'll switch into Bulgarian now. Следващата седмица на 24 ноември в Мазе Димитър Кенаров и Хана Комар ще бъдат в разговор и в интерактивно поетическо четене. Hannah has been writing, her poetry recently is dedicated to her experience during the protests in Belarus from 2 years ago. So whoever comes on the 24th, you'll have the pleasure. She's also a performing poet in a way. She deals with music and she's great on stage as well. So it's really our pleasure to have her here. For her, I brought here on the stage a little piece of, to remind us of the times when independent culture in Belarus was not under such a pressure as it is now for the last 2 years. This is a lamp that I bought from an independent cultural space, a little bit like this one here, but smaller in Minsk, the gallery U, that was hosting a gallery, a bookshop, readings, independent publishers, and that no longer exists. So I'm afraid we will be talking about this as well. And this is Hannah's last book here. Kate Griffin, as I said, the only native English speaking. Please, Kate. Kate Griffin works at the National Center for Writing in Norwich, an institution that hosts international residencies literary trainings, discussions, festivals, and it's indeed has become over the last years the national and the reference point for literature, contemporary literature in the UK. Previously, Kate has been working for the British Centre for Literary Translation at the University of East Anglia. And before that, she was the literature officer at the Arts Council of England. So we share a lot with her being on the side of the so-called literary management. But what you perhaps cannot read on the website is that she has a personal blog. She's also a photographer. And I do recommend her blog, kategriffin.org, where she writes about her travels and she shows her photography. We have two Vladimirs. Again, Vladimir Arsenievich. The second real writer among us. Vladimir Arsenievich is known in Bulgaria with this book, Vtruma. I don't dare pronouncing the original title in Serbian. This book, I recommend it. It's still, you can still buy it by Damian Yakov. It was published a long time ago and originally written in 1994, right?
94, yeah. Well, published in 94.
Yes, yeah, published in 94. This book won the Ninova Nagrada, the Nins Prize, which is perhaps the most prestigious, the most well-known Serbian literary award, and perhaps still is. Is it still such a...
It's the literary award. It's the award that's been given annually for the novel of the year.
So, but it still enjoys
the biggest kind of...
So nobody is questioning the...
Like the Serbian Booker, for example.
Something like that, yeah.
Vladimir is also known for his political engagement, for his positions on, of course, in the 90s on the war of Yugoslavia. He's the initiator of the so-called Declaration of a Common Language that talks about the mutual understandability of the languages of former Yugoslavia and pleas for understanding and writes about the rise of nationalisms and our, yes, as a political commentator as well. He's a founder of Crocodile, an organization that maybe is best known with its literature festival that takes place in Belgrade for the last 15 years. And you saw a video. Last year they had Margaret Atwood, some years online though. And they always have really prominent international and Balkan writers next to each other on an equal footing, I hope. And last but not least, Vladimir Jankovski from Macedonia. I cannot twist my tongue to say North Macedonia, but
whatever
officially from North Macedonia. Vladimir is also a multifaceted figure. He's a writer himself. This year he was nominated for the European Literature Prize with his book Skrijeni želbi nemirni patovanja, which is his last book in a second edition. He's also a publisher. He is editor-in-chief of the Goten Publishing House, a publisher that I invite you to follow what they do because they are really doing interesting stuff at the Macedonian literary scene. Anything that I'm missing?
No, it's okay.
I forgot when it comes to Vladimir Arsenievich. Ooh, my precious. Vlado is also editor of this absolutely great book, Lexicon EU Nostalgia, published
EU mythology.
EU Mythologie, late 90s, I guess, early 2000s.
It was compiled throughout the late 90s and beginning of the 2000s, but I think we published it in 2002 or 2003, something.
It's a collection of, as the title suggests, it's a collection of urban stories, little myths, and basically the mass culture and the everyday culture of Yugoslavia. Yeah. This is my personal copy. I'll leave it here if you want to, but please don't steal it. Okay, pleasure to having you, all of you here. What we will do today for the next 1 hour, perhaps, we'll talk with the discutants around what we see as developments in literature globally, in Europe, in our regions, in our countries, but really we, without having the pretension that we will, say it all and a determined tendencies that nobody else has seen before. I really hope we will hear their personal recommendations for authors, books, events that we may have not heard about. And towards the end, we will open to all of you, dear colleagues and readers, to ask questions to the panelists. And as you certainly know, there will be a literary quiz upstairs in the bar later on. And we are here, are a separate team participating in the quiz. So be prepared. Yes, I think Paul Auster says that translators are the hidden heroes of literature. Humbly, I would say that literary managers and editors and festival organizers are also the hidden heroes of literature. So most of us here on stage are, again, not perhaps professional literary critics, but we in our programming work every day, we take decisions. We care for socializing literature, presenting it to the readers. So in a way, the choices we make, and we are obliged to follow what's going on. So that's why we are here, I guess, to be up to date with what's going on. But also, we do make choices. What to publish, what topic to bring up for a debate, which authors to invite to our festivals. So yeah, that's why I think that we are somehow behind the scenes, all of us here, including the writers. But the decisions we take are sometimes also making trends. Without this, grand talk about tendencies, I know it's a bit frightening. At least it's frightening for me to say, okay, that this is what's going on globally in Weltliteratur, in world literature. But do you feel, just to launch the conversation and to start, do you feel that something has changed over the last 1, 2, 3 years, that there is something new going on in literature? Is there that, some people talk about the new abnormal after COVID, during a war in Europe, several other wars in other places of the world? Do you feel that we can talk about change? Biляна?
Well, this is definitely a very strange year. It is a kind of non-year and an omnipresent year because in a way it merges in this long COVID pandemic triple year. On the other hand, it started on the 24th of February with the beginning of the war. So it's in a way, it is in a way a shorter year, but we still don't know when it will end, in fact. And if we just take yesterday, we had in the morning the news that how is this in English? The 8 billionth person on Earth was born. So we are hitting the 8 billion. And in the evening, we had 2 missiles that hit a village in Poland and killed 2 persons. And this morning, we have the news that NASA is launching a spaceship to the moon, finally, again. So we are in a way torn between the total past, I mean the war is driving us to the past, and absolute future. And I really don't know anymore what is new and what is old, in short term or in long term. Because this deficit of future is sharpening, obviously, because of the war, and we are here. Most of us are people from the Eastern Europe. We were I don't know, promised the bright future. We were promised the cosmos. Finally, the world got mobile phone, not the cosmos. We were promised the universe. We are getting metaverse right now. So in literature, what to say? The 2 opposite tendencies, out of fiction and dystopian novels. But I guess we will talk deeper about these things.
And maybe historical ones as well.
And yeah, historical, mystically historical, nationalistic, yeah, especially for our part of the world.
Do you have the same?
Well, my notion was, when you started asking question, was that not much is happening in literature in terms of some new tendencies, but obviously things are happening in the world, and it takes time for literature, I think, to catch up and start reflecting properly. So I remember the time when obviously there was a massive moment in '89 when the whole communist world started crumbling and there was a change in Europe, but then Yugoslavia started taking backward steps, and little by little, or actually quite dramatically, we sort of disassociated from the rest of the world. And, you know, it took a very short while, and we all of a sudden, there was a war situation. And this is the time when I started writing the novel that you mentioned. And I did it in what you would now term, with this new lingo, like in real time, because as things were going on. So it took a while for it to be published. And I remember then that this theater person was asked in this public interview, so what happens in the field of theater? Why aren't the writers reacting to what is happening? We're living this reality and nothing happened. And then he says, well, you can't really push writers into writing. I mean, they would react when they feel that they were going to react. And then I remember, well, it's 1994, I do have this manuscript. So it took several years, obviously, for the writers to kind of figure out how to really kind of go around it. So probably the same is now. We are still living this reality, and it takes a while to figure out how to transfer it into words, right?
Well, I've been mostly following my region over the last years, 2 years, so I can mostly speak about Belarus, a bit about Ukraine. And Belarus' situation has been so dramatic and tragic in some ways, because of the events that happened after the election in August 2020. Yeah, the election was falsified, the results were falsified, and the huge protest followed, and it lasted for months and months. they like the visible part of it, and then the invisible part continues till now. And as a result, loads of people left Belarus, among them writers as well. Publishers have been shut down and also pushed out of the country. Like there are a lot of writers in prison now, at least 29 that we know, including the Nobel Prize laureate, Nobel Peace Prize laureate 2022, Ales Belatsky, is in prison now. So that all hasn't been helping literature to develop, but at the same time, I think the role of a writer in Belarus kind of changed. We've been documenting a lot, so we've been focusing on documenting the experience. But also what's interesting, and it happened with the Ukrainian literature as well, due to these awful, horrible, absolutely events, our literatures started being singled out more of these. You know, there is a notion of Eastern European literature. And usually when they say Eastern European...
Or Central European. Or Central European.
No, they like... What I hear is usually Eastern European, and when they say Eastern European, they mean Russian. So everything is Russian for them. Everything, you know, that has this around Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, is for most people is Russian. So when they talk about Eastern European literature, they say Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. And that sounds cool, yeah, you're considered cool if you know that. But what's beyond that? And how about us? We also exist, and our literatures are also interesting, and I believe have something to offer as well. And so due to the protest and repressions, political repressions in Belarus, our authors, writers, Belarusians started to be invited to events and discussions and readings and worldwide, and our work has been translated and published. And so, you know, that helps to finally become visible as Belarusians. And about Ukrainian, the one thing that I'm happy for Ukrainians is that finally also they're being seen. Their literature is being seen, their theater is being seen, their culture, their music, everything, you know, and it gets finally the attention it deserves. And there have been more conversation about decolonization, finally, decolonization of Russia, because I'm now based in London, and obviously there are a lot of conversation about decolonization in that region, right, like Great Britain and colonies, ex-colonies and stuff. And somehow Russia, the Russian Federation, all that stuff has been ignored, even I think by some of the most progressive historians, writers, etc. And now finally we're talking about it.
So you mean there is such a conversation in Belarus inside the country?
Yeah, yeah. Inside the country,
not by emigre
but also
writers
outside the country. It's like inside the country, inside Belarus, we've always known, you know, we know the history, our history, but people outside in the English-speaking world and other languages, you know, outside Belarus, outside Eastern Europe, they always just equal it all to Russia and don't know the difference, and this leads to tragedies like this huge war.
I was just wondering if even the very word colonization, is it in circulation? Is it used?
It's getting used.
Yeah, I guess we'll go back to this, what appeared in both Vladimir Arsenievich and your input, that unfortunately sometimes in our region you have to, there must be turbulences and wars and protests and dictatorships for the literature to get noticed.
But if I may just mention, it's also a double-edged sword, and I think we've had a chance to experience that in the region of former Yugoslavia, that you get this very narrow window through which you can have this communication with the outside world, and it's always about war, misery, social, economical mishaps, whatnot, and then everything else becomes kind of not quite interesting. So we have just had, I think Rumena Bužarovska is probably the first writer in many years, the Macedonian writer, with her collection of stories, My Husband, that has nothing to do with, the typical Balkan topics. It's really the gender issues and, married life and things like that. So I find it really, really important that finally there is a writer who could communicate something which is outside the scope of wars, misery, and, whatever failure that we are recognized to be, globally speaking.
Yes, Vladimir said a good point because, for example, yes, there are lots of challenges regarding the war in Ukraine, crisis with the ecosystem, etc., etc. But for the good literature, for my opinion, the theme is important, but it's not the most important thing. You can, for example, write an anti-war novel, which will be extremely banal. And on the other thing, you can write a love story which can be very deconstructive upon the social context in which you are writing. If you are deciding to speak about some of these things like war, tragedies, etc., etc., and if you decided to speak on the viewpoint which is in a pamphleting way or way which is just seeing and written 1,000 times before you will not succeed. The theme, the issue, it's important in the literature, but it's always the starting point. Vladimir Arsenievich didn't won the Nin Prize for his novel just because it's anti-war novel, but because it's a good written novel. And we should have in mind that in literature, the most important thing is how you treat your theme or how you speak. For example, you can say more deconstructive things about society, about the world, about the existence. If, for example, decide to speak about some island in Mediterranean in which 35 person lives, and in that topic, which is for some reason out of the world, to speak about the world and to speak about the life and to say meaningful something, not just for the literature, but in whole for the humanities. So issues, topics in literature are just starting points, nothing else than that.
Yeah, we're gonna go back to this, the political issues and the sociological issues in literature. But maybe Kate, because we already started, there is this a little bit unfair East European clique here. Slavic Balkan clique. And we already touched upon the extent to which literatures written in these lesser used or small languages are recognized or visible in translation. You gave the example of Rumena Bužarovska. You talked about Belarusian literature being finally noticed and Ukrainian literature being finally noticed. But is that from the perspective of the UK, is that the case? I mean, I know in English the visibility of translations in Britain has risen quite significantly recently. But do you see any trends in that respect? Like what gets translated, what gets noticed? Is it Belarusian, Ukrainian, East European writing, or is it rather non-European voices or other literatures?
Well, this is the view from Norwich rather than the view from the whole of the English-speaking world. So, but yeah, I think there's been from the point of view of publishing and translation in the UK over the past few years, there has been a shift. When I first started working with publishers and translators, the emphasis was much more on there was so much translation of literature from the big European languages such as French and Spanish and German. So there was a real push from organizations that I worked for to try and encourage publishers to translate from the small languages. So that has been something that's gradually been changing over the years. But I think also, and also with Brexit as well, suddenly, there's been, again, a renewed emphasis on translating from other European literatures into English. But there's also been a real push to look beyond the borders of Europe as well. A lot of interest in Asian languages. Japanese and Korean have been very popular. Chinese and Arabic literature has also had its turn. It's often linked with the market focus at London Book Fair when a lot of money funding is put into the promotion of a language, and so you see that peaks for a while and then it falls off.
Was there an Ukrainian focus in London, the same way there was at Frankfurt Book Fair this year? Like particular focus on Ukraine or not?
There wasn't really a market focus at the last London Book Fair, but there were several events around Ukraine, and it was a big topic of discussion at the book fair, yes. And then I think the other thing that's changed in the UK is basically the conversation around, well, as you said, decolonizing. We used to talk about diversity, but now we're talking much more about decolonizing. Who gets to write, who gets to publish, who gets to translate, who is it for? I mean, it's a very big and complicated discussion, but it's particularly since Black Lives Matter, the movement and the toppling of the statue of a slave trader in Bristol that had been standing there for many years and finally got pushed into the water. The conversation has really shifted, and who actually gets to speak, I think, is changing.
Including in literary translation?
Yeah,
yes. In the theory of literary translation, you brought an anthology of... the anthology that you brought here is...
I did. I have, yeah. This is kind of broad generalizations, but the UK publishing industry has been for many years, it's been very white, middle class, female dominated, as has the translation profession. And there's been the assumption that translators are working into English, are all mother tongue English translators, probably grew up monolingual, went off, learned a language, and are now bringing the literature into the English language. And that discussion has really shifted, and now there are more and more translators who are from Black and Asian and other ethnicities who are coming more center stage and changing the way that we talk about translation and who gets translated. There's a particular publishing house called Tilted Axis Press, who have published this anthology, Violent Phenomena, edited by two translators, Jeremy Tiang and Cavatabano. They're both translators and writers. And it's a collection of 21 essays on translation, but it's looking at different aspects of decolonizing from, there's no one issue within it, no one answer. It ranges from discussions about disability and translation to Dalit literature, translating Dalit or formerly untouchable literature into English, how that makes their lives visible and valued just within India, not let alone anywhere else.
But if I can,
all sorts of.
What extent this conversation remains solely within the independent publishing, intellectual circles, academics? Is there any, for example, if you look at the bestsellers list, or what readers what readers are buying. So not the books that get the critical acclaim of The Guardian or other important media, but if you look at the bestsellers list, it's all British, white, male, mass literature, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't look
Any
at
breakthroughs of translations into the mass market of books?
I think it takes a long time to change. But one example I'd give, I suppose, is translation of Korean and Japanese literature. That you do see more Japanese literature in translation on bestseller lists or on tables in the local Waterstones. I was in our local Waterstones bookshop the other day, which is a big chain, and there was a table devoted to one Japanese author. The book was called She and Her Cat. So, I mean, the fact that it was about cats may have had something to do with it. But, you know, the title was in gold lettering, which means the publisher has put money into marketing it. And what really struck me was that they had the name of the translator on the front cover, Ginny Takenmori. But she also had her own byline as translator of Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, which is another Japanese novel that has been a bestseller in the UK. So, you know, it's, and that's taken, I don't know, a good 10 years for that to happen. I mean, the Murakami effect aside, so it takes time, I suppose, is what I'd say.
Yeah, thank you. Since I brought up that topic about readers, but do you see any changes in readers' habits, in book buying habits over the last 2 years? There's been, of course, the pandemic brought up a renewed interest in books. Statistics shows that, particularly in the first year, there's been really, I mean, the book business has been skyrocketing in terms of sales. And I'm talking about physical books as well. Perhaps not both in physical bookshops, but purchased online. Nowadays, of course, this tendency is counteracted by the prices of paper that went really, like, again, twice higher than before the war. But in terms of readers' interest, you do as publishers, as festivals, you do as literary critics, perhaps you follow. Do you see any trends in that respect?
Well, in Belarus, Belarusians finally started to get interested in Belarusian books, which is funny, but it's an incredible. So the story with Belarus is that we have two official languages, Russian and Belarusian. Russian has been domineering, obviously. And there's been a stereotype that Belarusian literature is boring, desperate. It's not interesting. We're not going to read it once we finish school. And then as the protest began, transformation started happening. Some writers would get in jail, and that would suddenly make them get them on the media, you know. And then you're like, oh, let me read. Maybe it's interesting, right? And then there's this neighborhood movement appeared, where neighbors in different districts and towns and cities across Belarus started getting together, organizing parties like in their yards, organizing concerts, inviting writers, poets as well. And so again, then people got a chance to see, to hear, and, you know, step by step through this, also just because the Belarusian language has become a protest, a tool of protest in itself, yeah, and a rebellion in itself. And so that as well helped. And then publishers started getting like fined, arrested, shut down. That also, you know, to in solidarity with those publishers, people also started, like there were long queues to get Belarusian books. This was amazing. And now, since like hundreds of thousands of Belarusians are living elsewhere outside Belarus, they immigrated over the last 2 years. And there's a new tendency. They're very interested in Belarusian books, so there are now publishing houses which publish outside Belarus, and there are readers now who particularly they're looking for the ways to bring Belarusian books to their houses, to their libraries in exile. No, outside Belarus.
Yeah, but
in
not
Belarus,
translated, but
yeah,
in
Belarusian
Belarus.
books.
Yeah, okay.
Particular Belarusian
In
books,
the
and mostly
original
in the
language.
Belarusian language, which is
Okay,
very new.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good news for us.
So the books that are published outside in Lithuania, for example,
Yeah.
from what I know, can they travel back to the country and are they available to buy and read in Belarus proper, or
I think
you have to smuggle them?
Yeah, it's now harder probably to get some books inside Belarus than outside Belarus. You have to smuggle them in and out, like I did with my books, for example. And then KGB found my books at several people's homes simultaneously. But so there's some still, books which are in Belarus, but the publishers are not. And the publishers moved out of Belarus, and they are now starting to publish outside Belarus.
Including
but the books,
Svetlana Alexievich's publishing house, or they are still there?
I don't think they're publishing because they're not really publishing house, they're publishing initiative. So they cooperated with a publisher so there would be two names, Flaumbaum, which is the name of the initiative, and the actual publishing house who did the publishing itself, and now they cannot yet publish because the publisher was arrested and then thankfully released, and he immigrated, and it takes time to, settle in and start publishing. But also books can be, your parcels can be checked at the Belarusian border from both sides when they come in the country and they come out. And there were several cases when the books were confiscated at the border, and several books were recognized as extremist, and some people were actually arrested for keeping those books. So it's complicated.
Have we ever thought, as Biляna was saying in the beginning, have we ever thought that in Europe we will be talking about confiscation of books and smuggling and people being arrested, and literature being viewed as a dangerous thing?
Yeah, but I would say that this was very encouraging and very important to hear that, and I think it confirms a certain model that we can identify in Eastern Europe after 1989. In the beginning, of course, the societies were busy with other things, but in the course of, let's say, around 10 years, there was this shift of interest. A new audience was, so to say, developed, and a new literary community, and people start reading their native literatures. And I would say that actually there was a kind of velvet revolution in literatures as well, not only in politics. And this revolution was not easy, and the authors who came forward, they're not easy to be read. This is not a what we should call popular literature, though there's nothing bad in having popular literatures in our countries. But I mean, writers like Olga Tokarczuk, like Kartarescu, or let's say Andruchovich, they're complicated authors. They are experimental. They are changing the rules of how you write and how you read. They're experimenting with the boundaries, also with the reader's horizons, whatever. But they have been read in their own countries and hence abroad as well. And so let's hope that there will be a velvet revolution as well. We still don't know the end. We don't know the answer. And this is the thing that makes us nervous, considering Belarus and Ukraine. But it took this, let's say, 30 years, or maybe a bit less than 30. And what was done was noticed. And we have 2 Nobel Prizes of Svetlana Alexievich and of Olga Tokarczuk. And in fact, these Nobel Prizes sort of say, spotlighted exactly this velvet revolution in literature. And now what Putin is doing is, in a way, trying to deprive us of the whole legacy of velvet revolutions. He's saying you cannot choose your own way in a peaceful way of action. You have to go through blood and
But then he's doing
destruction.
the opposite, like he's not taking this all away from us. He's actually only amplifying the value of our own literatures.
Well, yes, in a way, he's giving back the strength also to the languages, not only to the literatures, to the languages as well, Belarusian and Ukrainian.
Yeah, because one more reason why more Belarusians have switched to Belarusian, to speak in Belarusian, those who would never think about doing this, is because Russian has become so obviously the language of the aggressor, that in speaking it has become kind of shameful when you have your own language to speak.
Going back to what Biljana was saying about, do you feel that in Serbia, and I'm not asking about Great Britain, but do you feel that in Serbia and in Macedonia, people generally read more local authors, contemporary literature written in your languages rather than in comparison to, say, 20 years ago? Do you think that's the... Because with some colleagues from Slovenia and Austria, we have done some years ago analysis of the bestsellers lists in different countries in Europe. And of course, I know you cannot always trust these lists because they are being manipulated by the big players. But it was so interesting to see how in certain countries, for the top 10, definitely in Scandinavian countries, and much to my surprise in the Czech Republic, from the top 10 bestsellers, you would have 8 Czech writers. Or in Scandinavian, you would have more than a half would be local contemporary authors, which until recently was not the case in Bulgaria. I think it was all about, I mean, of course, a mixture of Daniel Steele and Harry Potter and all that. But nowadays you have sophisticated, good literary writing in Bulgarian, getting through to the bestsellers lists, alongside with the how should I put it? Mythological, folkloristic trash
chick lit for,
written in Bulgarian that the president apparently reads. But so is there anything similar going on?
Serbia has this luck, I would say, after the breakup of Yugoslavia, that we share the common language with 3 other countries. And we talked about this a little today. We have these 4 political languages, as we call them, Bosnian, Croatian, Montenegrin, and Serbian, but it's the one language, one polycentric language, which is non-intertranslatable, so we read this writer in this one language. And this provides us with a lot of literary energy, which is not nowadays homegrown. We have a different situation in the publishing business because there are really feuds, highly protected out of economical reasons, where books do not travel to and fro. So what has to be done is for the Serbian publishers to republish the same texts in different jackets for the Serbian readers to be able to read the writers they love from the region. And luckily,
different price,
Serbia,
different cover price, sorry.
Yeah, And luckily in Serbia, regional writers are very popular. So if you talk Bosnian writers like Miljenko Jergović, or highly commercial writers like Vedrana Rudan from Croatia, or different writers from the region, are well read in Serbia, they're present in the market, and they're published in Serbia. So I think this gives us at least the possibility to have a wider territory, so to say, because otherwise the literatures have been deeply provincialized with these processes of disintegration and sort of belittling in a way. So we are always a very, very sad sight in Leipzig Book Fair or Frankfurt when you see these tiny little stands like, come on, Montenegrin stand, or, you know, and I'm not trying to insult Serbian stand or something like that. And then we are kind of championing the idea that there is something above the national or ethnic in literature, and it's the literature of the language, of this one same language with different standards and different dialects, and very lively and very interesting language that can be used in various literary ways. So we try to present that as a literary festival as well. But this is popular with the readers as well, and this is what's interesting. And then if you, I can't tell you the statistics, but I would kind of probably believe that if you would kind of see the list, what do you say, of the 10 best-selling titles, that there would definitely be some Serbian titles there, and then also some titles written by the writers from neighboring countries as well, and not only big Anglo-Saxon, you know, global hits.
But they would normally get published, for example, a Croatian author originally published by VBZ would then have a Serbian edition?
They would have to have a Serbian edition because there's also a big discrepancy in the book price as well in the region. So Croatian books are probably the most expensive in Europe. I mean, they're like 40 euros or 35 euros, something absolutely. And then Serbian books are ridiculously cheap. There is a terror of low prices. And this is something that publishers in Serbia feel a lot. It's really, really hard for them to survive because readers are really attentive on the price. So there is this invisible frontier. I mean, nothing should be more expensive than 10 euros. And you can't, you know the price. You mentioned the price of paper, which is skyrocketing and going crazy. And publishers really have a hard time explaining to the readers that in actuality, books should be twice as expensive as they are, but they're keeping the low price. So this also stops this kind of publishing communication in the region. And so we have this weird situation where popular writers also like Rumena would have a book in Bosnia and a book in Serbia and a book in Croatia, which is totally ridiculous. I mean, you'd much rather have one publisher supplying the whole region and then, you know, selling a lot of copies and making a lot of money and becoming
Yeah, but
rich.
this has been going on for 30 years now, 20 years, this conversation and this dream of a common market.
But yes, but the reason why this is lively is because if you see the festivals, it's a completely different story altogether. I mean, you go to the literary festival and all these people know each other, they perform each other, the audiences enjoy them equally, so there are so you have capitalism on one side, which is like the publishing business, and it's really hardcore in the region, and then you have this kind of field which was created by the writers themselves, which has nothing to do with the sales of books or something. It's just the notion that you have the tool, which is the language, and it's communicative in this wider, you know, territory, and then you're just using it. And ever since the year 2000, when, you know, things became 1/4 normal after the decade of wars and destruction, where you could finally travel and sort of communicate, it was the writers who first started performing together, like the FAK Literary Festival in Croatia, where the pun was pretty much intended, but it doesn't mean what it means in English. And then Bajbuk in Bosnia, and then Rend started also in Serbia, and they all followed the same regional idea, because we knew that the writers wanted to meet the readers, disregarding of whether they are holders of a Serbian passport or a Croatian passport or whichever passport. At the end of the day, it was about the language. So this is something which is irrevocable. I mean, it stays, whichever politics are happening at the moment, this thing stays. You can't stop it. So I think this is something which is really stronger, much stronger than the political field, and also the economical field, where the publishers are simply being protective of their own markets. And so, yeah.
Yeah, when you said the commercial titles, I'm just curious to maybe, I don't know if you know that, but when you say a commercial title in your countries, what kind of literature is that? Like the local Serbian bestseller, which from what I know would be a woman writer writing historic family sagas with a bit of a nationalist flavor. Is that a fair description of the current Serbian bestseller, Macedonian bestseller? This is an oversimplification?
No, yes, it's oversimplification. You cannot you cannot make stereotypes about what is the commercial title. In Macedonia, the situation is regarding the market strange. Macedonia is 2 million people. We produce around 40 novels per year, and 5 of these 40 novels per year are can reach some audience. From our history, we were focused first on reading books in Serbo-Croatian, Montenegrin language, because we didn't have sufficient and good publishing industry. This situation has changed in several years, but mostly we are, as culture, as publishing industry, focused on translation, because we as a cultural context cannot produce enough quality books for our context, and because traditionally the Macedonian reader is focused on reading translations. But regarding this foreign literature, there are two different nuances. First is this European production and production of European literature, and the second thing is some authors which are from the region, mostly Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, which are more or less popular because of the joint history that we have in the previous country. And some of new names from Macedonian literary scene that have some audience. So the ratio between 20 years ago between the buying of translated literature and domestic author was around, I would say, 90% to 10% in the favor of foreign authors, and now it's around 70-75% against 25% for also foreign and Macedonian authors. And we have more or less 5 or 6 Macedonian authors which are popular and which can, for example, if they publish a book, the book can be perceived by the audience. For example, Rumena Bužarovska. When you will compare Rumena Bužarovska, we can say that Rumena Bužarovska is most commercial Macedonian writer. She is not how to say, woman that writes family sagas with nationalistic.
She is writing family sagas,
but in a completely different way and manner. And when you are thinking about the most commercial Macedonian author in previous 5 years, she doesn't fit in this in our prejudice about what the commercial literature is. For example, one of the most popular foreign authors in Macedonia in previous 10 years is Bulgarian author Georgi Gospodinov. He also doesn't fit in our stereotype what can be a commercial author that can sell the books in some country.
But you don't have billboards of Gospodinov in Skopje.
Yes, we don't have billboards of Gospodinov in Skopje, but we don't also have billboards of any other writer in Skopje. So
it was in Belgrade that I personally saw for the first time in my life
billboards of writers,
billboard
which was
of a
amazing.
writer that is not Paulo Coelho's latest
Momo
book.
Capo.
And some local Serbian writer with a billboard in the center of Belgrade.
On the way to the book fair.
Yeah, on the way
Again,
to the
it's this publishing situation where we had this monopoly, we had these two massive publishing venues becoming even bigger and bigger, and you have Laguna on one side, which publishes like 400 books a year. It's really massive, and then they have their arch enemy and their volcanoes, so it's even ridiculous in this symbolic way, like you have a Laguna and then a volcano, so it's like this. And they compete, and it's a really sort of fierce fight between them, and they cover, it's really a pre-modern situation. I mean, they cover something like 80% of, the total number of titles which are published a year, and I think 75% of the book market. So they just take a large territory, and then they do whatever it takes to just push these books. So they put these writers on billboards. But let me tell you something. It sometimes works as a, how do you call it? How do you say it in English? When you, there's a term, I will remember when we finish. So
well, you can tell it in Serbian. We will try to translate.
They just decide this is going to be a hit. Because
that's what the impression I'm getting is that these big players, they can actually produce bestsellers and already produce authors and names and market them in a way that that in the bigger markets happens. No, that they produce them themselves.
They do, and sometimes they just fail miserably. So, as Vlado has said, I mean, who would have thought that it would be Rumena Bužarovska, but there you go. So, and some small or medium-sized publishers were much more clever in figuring out what the audiences want. So, for instance, we have this example of Buka Publishing House. They started, I mean, in Serbia, you have like 300, 400 titles for a big publisher, and then the medium-sized publisher would publish 15 titles. So, there's a massive gap in between. But so Buka started to grow, and they came to the point where they published 50, 60 titles a year. And they were really clever to recognize several things, that there is the actual homegrown interest in people. And then another thing, that 70% of the readers are women, and that these women fit the description of between 20 and 45-year-old medium to highly educated people, and they have different tastes in literature. It's not, you can't supply them just any kind of crap. They don't buy it. So they kind of like sort of started to target these book buyers and supply them with things that they want. So the reason why Rumena Bužarovska became extremely popular in Serbia, or Lana Bastasić that Georgi and I has just mentioned, that now has 20 translations all over the world, and was awarded with the European Literary Prize for her novel, is a beautiful example of new regional literature in the region of former Yugoslavia. And this is not the kind of literature that you are mentioning. So this has been pushed by the publishers, but there is the actual organic thing which is growing besides that, which finds readers in a much more honest and direct way.
And maybe now's the time, sorry to interrupt, but just to say that this year is also a year, the other big storm this year was the problem with women's rights. And we can take, of course, Iran, but on the other hand, from the very beginning of the year, we can take United States themselves, where the overturning of this famous Roe v. Wade case actually overturned the situation with the abortion rights. And this is a huge problem when it happens within the biggest democracy in the world. So this was a very bad sign, but it also somehow energized the literature as well. We can even perceive the Nobel Prize of Annie Ernaux through this optics, so to say. But apart from this, I just wanted to say that now this year in Bulgaria was published Majun by Vlada Urošević, Petmes in Bulgarian, and I think it is very well received, and it's quite an event now. And also, when I asked around some friends before this meeting, what are you reading, what was important for you, one of them, who is a very literary person, said this year I discovered Svetislav Basara because of a book I think published 2 years ago, The Rise and Fall of Parkinson's disease. Yeah. So it's good to know that there is a flow between, through our borders.
I also wanted to mention the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago, which was given to the writer Abdul Razak Gurna, who had been kind of, sitting in Kent for years, quietly producing these beautiful novels that address a lot of issues of decolonizing and life in post-colonial countries. But only very few people had heard of him. And of course, as soon as he won the Nobel, his books were very much in demand, and it was kind of his big breakthrough, in his mid-70s, finally. But so that was really interesting to see as a choice for the Nobel Prize for Literature, an author like that. And I was also going to mention the Booker International Prize, which is not the Booker Prize, it's the Booker International Prize for books in translation. But for the last few years, that's made a big difference to the visibility of books in translation and also their selection. This year, the winner was Tomb of Sand, which is a novel published by Tilted Axis Press, which is a small publishing company, by Gitanjali Shri, translated from the Hindi by Daisy Rockwell. And we were working with Tilted Axis at the time, and we just couldn't get any answers to emails for about a month because the demand for this book, and it's a very thick book as well, they had to immediately go to reprint. And it's the first time that a book in translation from South Asia has really had that profile in the UK. So that was a big success. Actually translated by a white American author, but inspired by the success of this book. So this is a little anecdote. A translator in the UK called Vineet Lal, whose mother was an educationalist, has set up a Hindi mentorship as part of our mentoring scheme in memory of his mother. So he's funded that. Daisy is mentoring, but the mentee who she selected is a young translator from India. So that's what I mean about it being a kind of a long process. You were asking about how quickly things change, and I would say slowly, but they are starting to change, and it's becoming visible within the sector anyway.
Yeah, as usual, we are jumping from topic to topic, but we have so many people and so many different perspectives here on stage and individualities. So we have the time for one last round here for getting a bit more personal. I already heard from Kate, perhaps you mentioned the International Booker that is changing the playground somehow in the UK when it comes to translated fiction. But maybe if I can ask you humbly to, just for one last round, to perhaps share with the audience about your personal literary revelations or experience with books, writers, events, fellow readers, perhaps, something that was important for you over the last 1 year as readers, as cultural programmers, either a particular book that is perhaps not translated into Bulgarian, but we have to take a note on. I would say for myself and Dora, who is the organizer of this evening, we saw in Frankfurt, Sergei Zhadan's performance, Foxtrotty, went with some other people who are here, who are in Frankfurt. It's a musical poetical performance based on Ukrainian poetry from the 20s. And for me, for the last 1 year, I think this was the most interesting, unusual experience in literature. I mean, I'm not talking about the books I'm reading, but Do you have anything that you would remember for the last year, something that happened to you as readers?
Yeah, I read the book of a Zimbabwean writer, pen painter, prize laureate of 2021, Tsitsi Dangaremba, and she has a trilogy. One of the books is titled This Mournable Body, and the other two I can't remember, but I read two of them, and it was stunning how, although it seems, where is Belarus, you know, where Belarus is and where Zimbabwe is, but I could recognize the protagonist is a woman, is a young woman, and I could recognize her experience so well. And it's, for me, it's so striking how we can, it doesn't matter where you live really, you can still relate to the experience. And because the protagonist was speaking, you know, she was not a hero. Very often I think the protagonists of novels are kind of heroes, you know, that you want to look up to. But this was not, and her thoughts, some of them, you know, she was just a mere mortal. She felt shame. She had like, she hated some people. She was jealous. She was envious. So all these kind of very human emotions, and it was such a relief to actually be reading that from a protagonist, because you think, yeah, I feel that sometimes as well, and it's so good to, it kind of, you know, to know that, okay, it's okay, it can even be like, you know, in a book, very important, very amazing book.
Maybe afterwards you can spell out the name for us, for the audience, but okay, thank you. Biляna, do you have a literary experience that you would remember? Or something notable, something that you want to...
Well, certainly for us, the coming of Olga Tokarczuk was quite something here at that place. On the other hand, I was lucky to be at the Edinburgh Book Festival, so there, apart from the literary events, there were also some events on the edge of literature and other things, like, for example, P.J. Harvey presenting her new book of poetry, which was maybe not excellent as a text, but as a performing was something. These are things that come to mind. But on the other hand, I'm absolutely hypnotized by the genre of essays, not only because I teach essay writing, but also because I think this is actually the genre of crisis, of rupture, of loss. It is no coincidence that Michel de Montaigne was, I mean, he was contemporary of plague, of religious wars. Some people say he started writing his essays immediately after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. And I think essay is this special juncture. It is short. It provides, it is a form of quick reaction, and it can be really quick, but also very deep and reflexive. So I think we are in times of essays now, again, as it was, let's say, after the First World War or in the eve of the Second World War. So I was reading from Montaigne through Virginia Woolf to the essays published in the New Yorker, but I also found a book of 3 essays about Central Europe. It was compiled by a colleague of us, Ani Burova, 2 years ago, and I think it went totally unnoticed until suddenly the war broke. And when I opened this book, I was absolutely, I don't know, I was stunned, especially from the first sentence of Yuri Andruchovich's essay, which started that in the 90s, we loved ruins very much. And now you look at Ukraine, and of course this is done with irony. We loved to drink beer at ruins and things like that, but it seems, I don't know, it seems devastating prophecy, written maybe 20 years ago. So yeah, essays, I think.
I think for me, 2022 has been the year of, personally, reading big books. It was when I finally got COVID that I read, finally. So I could sit on the sofa and read the books of Jacob by Olga Tokarczuk. So that was a very, and it was just wonderful to escape and completely immerse myself in that world. And then my second big escape of the year was, the UK, I think, has kind of taken on the role of entertaining the rest of the world politically this year. It's just been a total farce. And when we, peaked and had Liz Truss as our Prime Minister, on my bookshelf for a number of years, I've had The Story of the Stone, the Chinese classic, 18th century classic. It's also known as The Dream of the Red Chamber or The Dream of the Red Mansion. It's 5 volumes, and some of them are very thick. It's set in the mid-18th century in a mansion in one of those beautiful Chinese gardens. All they seem to do is drink lots of wine, write poetry, lots of gossip and intrigue among the family and the servants. It's a really entertaining read against a backdrop of, changing fortunes. So that was in translation that came out in the 70s and 80s, I think, by David Hawkes and John Minford. But if it's translated in any of your languages and you either get COVID or you need to escape for some other reason, I would really recommend it.
So this is your comfort reading.
My comfort
is
reading,
18th
yes.
century Chinese.
Yes, yeah. So when you asked me to talk about contemporary literature, I was a bit like, oh no.
Okay, Vlado and Vlado,
Vladimir?
your 2022.
I'm so lousy about I have no idea. So many things. We mentioned Lana Bastasic, and I would like to stress that there is this really, really cool wave in regional literatures, meaning literature of the common language in former Yugoslavia, which consists of basically 95% females, and they bring a lot of really, really good new energy in our literature. We have been stuck in our own vortex. We had to write about our experience of the wars in the 1990s. We felt this fatigue. It felt that we overwrote it, but there was no production of these books. So what happened in the end? We didn't end up writing them, but we just felt sick of them, and the readers shared this kind of attitude. So Lana came with this new way of writing it, because this is the generation that actually grew up through the wars. It was not the generation that lived through the wars, but kind of like had to really kind of grow up in a very hard way. She also embodies this kind of floating identities that also exist in our region, where everything seems to be too ethnic, too national, too fixed in these kind of like really hard identities to bear. But she's like a no one in that sense. She has a Croatian passport, but she grew up in Bosnia, but then she lives in Serbia, and then basically she's all around the place. So in a way, I think she kind of like represents kind of like a possible recipe for the future, where we would finally find sort of our ground and be a normal country again.
So Lana Bastaric.
Lana Bastaric and her novel,
Uhvati zeca.
I'm so happy to hear that you believe in a thing called Balkan literature, but we'll talk about this. Vlado, your recommendations?
I feel extremely uncomfortable when I should answer this type of question and recommend something and wrap up my whole year in some small recommendation. But on the other hand, I have to answer to your questions. So yes? One? Yes, it will be one. My answer is that all this previous year I have lived with the impression that we live in the society in which velocity is becoming higher and higher and higher, and we are. And on the other hand, this year I really enjoyed in the book of essays by Italian writer Franco Cassano, Mediterranean Thought, in which he opposes the current situation in our society, obsessed with velocity, with the slowness. He says that we should slow our life. We should slow the way we are thinking about the processes around us. We should slow the way we are communicating and starting communication all around us. And that we should be slow like all ladies and people who are going through some spot very slow, and in the moment of going through this spot they are inventing the path because they have time for it, and not just going from one place to another place in most efficient time. So this is my recommendation for the Bulgarian colleagues in the audience. Book of essays, Mediterranean Thought, by Italian writer and sociologist Franco Cassano.
Okay, thank you. So what I got from this last thing is slow down and read Chinese 18th century writing. I'm sorry, we are a little bit late, running late in time, and I cannot really see you. We here actually cannot really see the audience, but we can take, before the quiz, we can take 2-3 questions, comments, other recommendations perhaps. The organizers have done a little bit of polling via Facebook on your literary events of the year, and 99.9% of the people said Olga Tokarczuk and Georgi Gospodinov. We are not Olga Tokarczuk here, but so if you have questions for...
I have a question.
See you.
Ekaterina Petrova, Samas. I know most of you, but for those that I don't know, I have a comment and a question, but in order for them to make sense, I have to say that I'm a literary translator, usually from Bulgarian into English. And a lot of my energy, instead of towards translating, goes towards looking for ways to get these Bulgarian authors out there in English, looking for publishers. And so the comment, I guess, the comment is, earlier in the spring, I don't know, if after the war started in Ukraine, March or April, a friend of mine who's a translator from Spanish into English called me and she said, "Are you fucking ready? You're gonna get so much work now. This war is gonna, make interest towards Eastern European literature blow up. You're gonna have a lot of work." And I thought, fucking hell, like if this has to happen for me to have work, this is a, terrible, terrible situation. I'd rather, nobody asks me, but if I had a choice, I'd rather Bulgarian literature remain obscure forever than, for it to blow up at this cost. But nobody's asking me. And sort of in connection to that, I guess my question is, you didn't really mention literary agents and the role of literary agents. As far as I know, I know a little bit the situation in Serbia and Macedonia. I know it in Bulgaria pretty well. There's some efforts being made, but a lot of authors don't have literary agents. And these two examples that you were using, of course, I don't want to underestimate in any way Rumena Bujarovska, Georgi Gospodinov, but I don't think it's completely inconsequential that they have agents. And so I don't know, I wonder if you think, what's the way to go? What seems to make sense? Is it for local agents to develop and sort of try to promote these authors abroad? Is it for these authors to try and get represented by big international agents? If you can talk a little bit about that, I would be grateful.
Do you direct the question to anybody in particular, does anybody have a stance on this?
Well, I don't know.
Because I do, but I'll try to shut up.
Agents are overestimated, I would say, but they're necessary, of course. But when you come from Eastern Europe, even an agent can't help you. That's what I can say.
Yeah. I would also add, if you're a poet, even an agent can't really help you. And if you're a poet from Eastern Europe, no hope.
Yeah, we didn't speak
But
about
maybe,
poetry at all.
can I say something that we mentioned yesterday? That maybe these type of meetings and also festivals, they are a place where agents should be invited as well, and cultural managers and cultural journalists as well who are interested in our region. This is very important, I think.
Yeah, and also, I guess Ekaterina's question is also part of her bitter experience and the bitter experience of hundreds of other literary translators who actually act as agents of the authors, and half of their time goes into tasks that do not come naturally to them. But this is equally valid for Bulgarian authors, translators working with Bulgarian authors, and translators working with any other small language in the world. Okay, anybody else who wants to intervene? I don't see you. Okay, we take 2 more questions because we are really...
Yeah, sorry to hold up everyone, but I also have a question. I would like to ask, Biляна mentioned that there has been a flow between Eastern European language literatures, but I would like to ask, what do you think is the visibility of this flow in your countries connected to Eastern Europe?
Sorry, the visibility of what?
The visibility of other Eastern European countries' literature.
You mean whether we know each other, so to speak?
No, not whether we know each other. Does the Serbian public know Romanian authors or Bulgarian authors and so on? Yeah.
Well, Hannah, the presence of
I don't think we know any Bulgarian.
Other Eastern European. Yeah, which Bulgarian authors
No,
do you?
actually, I don't think we. I'm thinking now, if any, because if I knew any, that would probably be in Belarusian translations, and I don't think we have any Belarusian translations of Bulgarian authors, which is bad.
But
terrible.
also the Belarusian market for translations is very much dependent on what the Russian publishers choose to translate.
No,
and
not anymore. Not now. No.
Yeah, not now. Okay, but
No, no, it's actually Belarusian, the market of translation into Belarusian, it depends on personal choices, because you mostly do it, you volunteer to do it, right? You invest a lot of your own things and get very little back. So it's just really personal choice. So Margaret Atwood was translated because the translator wanted to do it, right? The Penelope and Harry Potter. Well, Harry Potter was translated for a commercial success and probably has been, but otherwise it's either personal. So if you like a book, you like the author, you like the writer, you translate it, or if there is funding. So if there is funding from Bulgaria and somebody who speaks Belarusian also speaks Bulgarian, that's possible to translate.
maybe Vlado, do you have one? Vladimir Yankovsky was telling on the question of how visible our literatures here in the region are. Vladimir Yankovsky has been telling me yesterday as to how when Georgi Gospodinov or Alek Popov appear on stage in Skopje, you should go like half an hour beforehand to get a seat, because the hall gets packed. So apparently contemporary Bulgarian authors are well present in the Macedonian scene and visible, right?
Yes, but not just Bulgarian authors. First, yes, of course that the main focus is toward toward literature from the Western countries, but we have a strong focus toward literature from the ex-Yugoslav countries, and the Serbian, Croatian, even Bosnian, Montenegrin literature are very, very present in Macedonian publishing context. But also it's interesting to point that, for example, some of the, I don't know, biggest names also for other East European literature are also translated into Macedonian. For example, yes, for Bulgarian we have 5 or 6 authors translated into Macedonian, beside Gospodinov, Alek Popov, Milan Ruskov is translated, Kalin Terziski is translated, Petar Denchev is translated, Elena Alexieva now was published. Yes, a lot also, for example, from Romanian literature, Mircea Cărtărescu is translated. But generally, Macedonia is specific context because we are focused mostly on translation in previous 20 and 30 years. And also, we have to address the thing that a lot of translations are not made because they are commercially books, but because a lot of books are 90% of all of these books are financed by EU program for literary translation, for the from the national programs of the countries for support of translation of literature. In Macedonia, it's not so expensive to produce the book, etc., etc. So a lot of small or medium-sized publishing house are translating and publishing books from East European authors as a way of cultural dialogue and cultural communication, and because they want to have this book in their catalogs, not because it has a commercial success. But they are satisfied, and this is good that the book will be supported from the national fund. They will also invest a small amount of their money. Maybe the book will also have subsidies from Traduki or from Macedonian Ministry of Culture, and they're satisfied with that book that is translated and present on a Macedonian cultural context. And that's not something we should criticize too much, because we cannot perceive publishing industry in Macedonia just as industry, but also as a way of communication between we and our neighbors, between the other cultures. And in our country, publishing is sometimes more connected with this intercultural dialogue than just to make money on the market.
Yeah. Because we are small markets.
Yes,
I try to avoid
market.
I try to avoid talking about money and the way money flows determine the translation flows as well. Anyone last intervention? Very quick, very quick.
Yes, no. Okay. I will be quick, but my question is directed at the translators and those who have experience in translating. So recently I've seen that some books written in more distant languages, for example, Japanese, have their Bulgarian translations based on the English translation. So the book is first translated into English, and then someone translates it from English into Bulgarian, and I wonder what is the translator's opinion on this. For example, does it help bring visibility to authors who write in more unknown languages, or does it change the author's original words too much to work with translation of a translation?
Thank you. Yes, we don't have real literary translators here. Some of us...
I'm a translator of poetry.
Some of us have translated. Biляна is also has translated literature, but that's not our primary occupation. But I believe you do have an opinion on so-called mediated translations? For or against?
Well, in this case, I would be against because, I mean, Japanese language and English language are two different, and while you translate, you lose a lot, and then you translate again and you lose even more. So in this case, I would be completely against it.
I would kind of add to that I think what would be important in that situation is a conversation with the Japanese to English translator, and possibly also with the author and the editor, so that you get a sense of exactly, as you say, what was changed from Japanese into English and the kind of choices that were made. I think that dialogue is really important. Bridge translation seems to happen a lot where there aren't translators in that combination in it.
But I think we have translators from Japanese, so it's strange. It's a question of publishers' decision or indecision. I don't know. At least we have this Liu Cixin, the famous Chinese science fiction writer, who is translated directly from Chinese.
But we do have translators from Japanese,
of course
direct translators into Bulgarian. But I just want to be on a less popular position here. Of course, the danger when you work from the English is that you really depend very much on the choice of the English translator and the English editor. And very often we have cases when whole sections of books are being just cut off because they would appeal difficult for the English reader. So it's dangerous. But in certain cases, I'm totally for. For example, the most recent example from my work is a translator into Farsi, into Iranian. Bulgarian to Iranian, there is nobody, to my knowledge, that works directly Bulgarian to Iranian. And
there is no one who works Bulgarian to Spanish, so... Sometimes
there are these bilingual.
Well, it's more.
So this person who is otherwise translator from English into Farsi, he came to Sofia on a translation residency, and a year and a half later, we have 6 contemporary Bulgarian books translated in Iran and published in Iran, all via English. I cannot say anything about the quality of the translation, but for the last 20 years, the other translations into Farsi out of Bulgarian was Historia Sloveno-Bulgarska. And then suddenly, due to this guy and his non-speaking Bulgarian, we have 5-6 new books. Okay, thank you so much. So basically against mediated translation, but there are certain cases.
Depends on the context.
Especially with small languages, sometimes it's unavoidable. We've been jumping again from topic to topic, the past and the future. We didn't really cover all the topics that we wanted to, but I hope with the audience that you got a little bit of sense of the individuality and the viewpoints and the styles of our guests today. And we are ready to be challenged with the literature quiz, I guess, and some drinks in the bar. So thank you all, and let's move upstairs if you don't mind. Thank you.